Hi guys, Brent here, and just like shutter speed affects exposure, so does the aperture. So let's have a look at a couple of other images I've shot at this marina where I explained how shutter speed affects exposure, and let's have a look at what happens when we change the aperture. So this image is properly exposed 1/400th of a second at f8. So f8 is kind of the middle of the range aperture. It's kind of half open and half closed. It's the hole in the lens is kind of half the size to what it can go at. So f8, we're going to start over there, 1/400th of a second. You'll notice the histogram is properly exposed. There's information all the way from the darkest area of this histogram all the way to the lightest area of this histogram. It's giving us a graphical representation of the exposure with the intensity of the light. So it's a really well exposed image. There is information in the shadow areas of this image, so in the trees over here, and there's information in the highlights. There's information in the boats over here. You can see the little step up on this boat right over here, and there's information in those boats over there. So what happens if we change the aperture? f8, let's go to the next one, f11. So we are closing the aperture. We're making the hole in the lens half the size, and we're letting in half the light. f11, so we go back f8 to f11. You'll notice the histogram is starting to the information is starting to come from to the left of this graph, so it's telling us it's getting darker, and we're losing information in the shadow area. So the trees over here, we're losing information. It's a lot harder to see what's in there. So if we go to the previous one, f8, there's still information in the trees. f11, we kept the shutter speed the same, the ISO is the same, the aperture is the only thing we're changing. So f8 to f11, you can see how it starts getting darker, and we might even go again to f16, so we've even made the hole in the lens even smaller. So f16 tells us that the hole is smaller. If you look at the exposure chart, you'll notice at f16 the hole is a lot smaller, and you'll notice all the information is on the left. So all the information is darker, and we're actually losing information in the darker area. So we still got information in the highlights, so you'll notice there's still really good information on the stepping board on this boat over here, but the information in the trees is gone. All the darks are gone. And we'll go even one more. So f22, that's a tiny hole in the lens, and all the highlights are now on the left side of this graph. So we got really good information in the yachts, in the highlights, but we've lost all the information in the shadows. The sky's gone, this whole foreground over here is gone. So let's go back and have a look. So f22, the smallest hole in the lens, the aperture. If we go f16, we're doubling the size of the aperture, and we're letting in more light. f11, we're doubling the size again in the aperture, we're letting in more light. f8, we've doubled the size in the aperture again, and we've let in more light, and that's a properly exposed image. So as you can see, if we decrease the size of the aperture, we're letting in less light, the image goes darker. We increase the size in the aperture, we're letting in more light, and the image goes lighter. So that's how we can affect the exposure with the aperture. Now aperture does one more thing. Can you remember what it is? Aperture also affects the depth of field of an image. So the smaller the aperture, the more depth of field, so the more stuff is in focus. So if we are looking at the marina, the walkway over here at f8, this might be in focus, but the trees in the background might be out of focus. And if we go all the way to f22, which will come up in a second, we'll go back to, let's go back to f22. This is the smallest aperture we got. That means we got the greatest depth of field. That means the foreground is in focus and the background is out of focus. Where if we go back to f8, the foreground might be in focus and the background's out of focus. So that's what aperture does, as well as exposure. It affects the depth of field of an image.